Listen up. Every relationship with avoidant partners follows a predictable 7-stage cycle that creates the psychological equivalent of an addiction-inducing roller coaster ride. It's fun for the first 5 minutes, but any longer than that and it becomes a form of torture. This is what the avoidant does to their partner. Each stage is carefully orchestrated by the avoidant's unconscious need to maintain emotional distance while accessing relationship benefits, creating a pattern of intermittent reinforcement that keeps their partner psychologically hooked despite receiving inconsistent emotional nourishment. Understanding these stages reveals why these relationships feel simultaneously thrilling and torturous, and why breaking free requires recognizing the cycle rather than hoping for different outcomes. Stage 1. The intoxicating hook, love bombing with emotional distance. The first stage of avoidant relationships involves a sophisticated form of love bombing that differs from typical narcissistic love bombing because it includes subtle emotional unavailability that makes the attention feel more valuable and challenging to earn. During this phase, avoidants display their most charming and attentive behavior while maintaining just enough emotional distance to keep you intrigued and slightly off balance. They may shower you with attention, plan elaborate dates, and demonstrate intense interest in your life, but this attention comes with an underlying quality of emotional detachment that makes you feel like you're always trying to earn their full presence. The psychology behind this stage involves creating what researchers call intermittent reinforcement, providing just enough positive attention to create addiction while withholding enough to maintain control. The avoidant instinctively knows that completely available attention feels less valuable than attention that must be earned or that comes and goes unpredictably. Their charm during this stage often feels different from typical romantic pursuit because it lacks the emotional vulnerability that usually accompanies genuine romantic interest. They may be incredibly attentive and thoughtful while maintaining an air of emotional invulnerability that makes them seem more sophisticated and self-contained than other potential partners. The avoidance presentation during this stage often includes emphasizing their independence, success, and self-sufficiency in ways that make you feel honored to receive their attention. They position themselves as people who don't need anyone, making their choice to spend time with you feel special and validating. This positioning creates an immediate power imbalance where you feel grateful for their attention rather than evaluating whether they're worthy of yours. The physical and sexual chemistry during this stage is often intense, partly because the emotional unavailability creates psychological tension that translates into physical attraction. This stage typically lasts 2 to 6 months, depending on how quickly you demonstrate willingness to accommodate their emotional limitations and how successfully they can maintain their charming facade without triggering their own intimacy fears. The stage ends when they feel confident that you're sufficiently invested to tolerate decreased attention and emotional availability. Most importantly, this stage creates what therapists call trauma bonding. Your nervous system becomes addicted to the specific neurochemical cocktail that their inconsistent attention provides. The combination of high rewards, intense attention, and subtle punishment, emotional distance, creates psychological dependency that makes their future withdrawal feel like withdrawal from an addictive substance. Stage 2. The gradual withdrawal, testing your accommodation. The second stage involves the avoidant gradually reducing their emotional availability and physical presence while monitoring your response to this decrease. This stage serves as a testing ground to determine how much emotional unavailability you'll tolerate while maintaining your investment in the relationship. The withdrawal typically begins subtly, slightly longer response times to messages, occasional canceled plans, or moments of emotional distance during conversations. These changes feel concerning, but not dramatic enough to warrant serious relationship discussions, leaving you wondering if you're being oversensitive or imagining problems that don't exist. During this phase, the avoidant carefully observes your reactions to their decreased availability. If you pursue them more intensely when they withdraw, They learn that withdrawal creates the chase dynamic they find psychologically comfortable. If you match their distance with your own withdrawal, they may temporarily increase attention to re-engage your pursuit before resuming their gradual distancing. The psychological mechanism at work involves conditioning you to accept decreasing standards of treatment while maintaining high emotional investment. Each small withdrawal that you accommodate without significant resistance becomes the new baseline for acceptable behavior, allowing them to gradually reduce their relationship effort while maintaining your commitment. This stage often includes the introduction of external factors that justify their decreased availability, increased work demands, family obligations, or social commitments that require their attention. These justifications make their withdrawal seem reasonable rather than deliberately chosen, preventing you from questioning their commitment or emotional availability directly. The avoidance communication patterns change significantly during this stage, becoming more practical and less emotionally intimate. Conversations that once included personal sharing and emotional connection become more surface level and logistical, leaving you feeling like you're losing the person you fell for without understanding why. This stage typically involves the first instances of them seeming to forget about your emotional needs or relationship expectations. They may miss important events, fail to provide support during difficult times, or seem genuinely surprised when you express hurt about their decreased attention and availability. The duration of this stage varies greatly depending on your response to their testing. Partners who immediately address the withdrawal and set boundaries may either motivate temporary improvement or trigger an accelerated move to the next stage. Those who accommodate the withdrawal by increasing their own pursuit often remain in this stage for months as the avoidant gradually reduces their effort while you gradually increase yours. Stage 3. The push-pull dynamic. Intermittent reinforcement. Intensifies. The third stage represents the establishment of the core avoidant relationship pattern, unpredictable cycles of emotional availability and withdrawal that create psychological addiction through intermittent reinforcement. This stage is where the relationship becomes most psychologically damaging and simultaneously most difficult to leave. During this phase, the avoidant alternates between periods of increased attention and affection, followed by withdrawal and emotional distance, with no predictable pattern or clear triggers for these changes. One day they may be loving, attentive, and fully present, while the next day they seem distant, distracted, or even slightly cold, leaving you constantly confused about where you stand. The psychology behind this stage involves creating maximum psychological dependency through unpredictable reward schedules. Research shows that intermittent reinforcement creates stronger behavioral conditioning than consistent reinforcement, explaining why this stage becomes so addictive despite being emotionally unsatisfying. The positive periods during this stage often feel particularly intense because they contrast so sharply with the withdrawal periods. This stage also typically involves the avoidant beginning to use your emotional reactions to their withdrawal as justification for further distance. When you express hurt, confusion, or anxiety about their inconsistent behavior, they may label you as needy, emotional, or demanding, reframing your normal responses to their inconsistent treatment as evidence of your dysfunction. The sexual aspect of the push-pull dynamic often becomes particularly confusing during this stage. Physical intimacy may be intense and emotionally connected during their pull phases, only to become perfunctory or unavailable during their push phases. This inconsistency in physical connection often mirrors and amplifies the emotional confusion. Communication during this stage becomes increasingly frustrating as the avoidant begins to use various tactics to avoid discussing relationship patterns or their inconsistent behavior. They may deflect conversations about the relationship, change subjects when you express concerns, or become defensive when you attempt to address their emotional unavailability. The practical aspects of your shared life may also become subject to the push-pull dynamic. Plans may be made enthusiastically during pull phases, only to be canceled or treated with indifference during push phases. Future discussions may be welcome one day and avoided the next, creating constant uncertainty about the relationship's direction. This stage often includes the beginning of what feels like walking on eggshells. As you become hypervigilant about saying or doing things that might trigger their withdrawal, you may find yourself modifying your natural emotional expressions, minimizing your needs, or carefully managing your approach to avoid upsetting the delicate balance. The duration of this stage can extend for months or even years as the intermittent reinforcement pattern becomes the relationship's primary dynamic. Many people become so psychologically dependent on the highs of the pull phases that they're willing to endure extended push phases for the promise of renewed connection. The emotional toll of this stage includes chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, and the development of trauma bonding that makes the relationship feel simultaneously toxic and irreplaceable. Your nervous system becomes addicted to the neurochemical fluctuations created by their inconsistent behavior, making their presence feel essential even when it's painful. Stage 4. The devaluation. Your needs become burdens. The fourth stage involves the avoidance, systematically devaluing your emotional needs, relationship expectations, and efforts to create deeper connection. During this phase, everything that initially attracted them to you becomes reframed as evidence of your emotional dysfunction or excessive neediness. This stage typically begins when you start requesting greater consistency, emotional availability, or commitment based on the time you've invested in the relationship. Instead of responding to these reasonable requests with discussion or effort, the avoidant begins to portray your needs as excessive, unrealistic, or evidence of your inability to appreciate their independence and autonomy. The devaluation process involves subtle but consistent criticism of your emotional expressions, relationship expectations, and attempts to create intimacy. They may roll their eyes when you express feelings, sigh with exasperation when you want to discuss the relationship, or make comments that suggest your emotional needs are burdensome rather than normal aspects of partnership. During this phase, the avoidant often begins to compare you unfavorably to other people who don't need as much attention or who are more independent than you are. These comparisons serve to make you feel like your relationship needs are character flaws rather than reasonable expectations for intimate partnership. The avoidance language during this stage often includes phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "You're overthinking this," "You need to give me space." Not everyone needs as much emotional connection as you do. This language systematically gaslights your perceptions while positioning them as the reasonable party in relationship conflicts. This stage often includes the avoidant beginning to withdraw practical support and partnership behaviors that they previously provided willingly. They may become less helpful with shared responsibilities, less interested in your daily experiences, and less available during times when you need emotional support. The sexual relationship typically becomes more disconnected during this stage, with the avoidant treating physical intimacy as separate from emotional connection. They may remain sexually interested while becoming emotionally unavailable, creating confusion about their feelings and investment in the relationship. The avoidant's social behavior may also change during this stage as they begin to prioritize other relationships and activities over time with you. They may spend more time with friends who are critical of the relationship, pursue hobbies that exclude you, or generally behave as if the relationship is less important than other aspects of their life. This stage often triggers increased efforts from their partners to prove their worth and regain the avoidant's appreciation. The more you try to accommodate their criticism and meet their standards, the more they devalue your efforts, creating a cycle where your increasing investment is met with decreasing appreciation. The psychological impact of this stage includes significant erosion of self-worth, confusion about your own emotional needs, and increasing tolerance for treatment that should be unacceptable. You may begin to internalize their criticism and genuinely wonder if your relationship expectations are unreasonable or excessive. The duration of this stage often depends on your tolerance for being systematically devalued and your willingness to continue accommodating their emotional limitations while receiving decreasing appreciation for your efforts. Some people remain in this stage for extended periods, hoping that their accommodation and understanding will eventually restore the connection from earlier stages. The fifth stage involves the avoidant emotionally checking out of the relationship while maintaining physical presence, essentially beginning the discard process long before any official breakup occurs. During this phase, they operate as if they're single while technically still in a relationship, creating emotional abandonment that prepares both of you for the eventual formal ending. This stage typically begins when the avoidant realizes that their devaluation tactics haven't eliminated your emotional needs or relationship expectations. Instead of addressing these needs or ending the relationship cleanly, they begin to withdraw so completely that you're essentially in a relationship with someone who's psychologically absent. The emotional checkout manifests as complete indifference to your feelings, experiences, and relationship concerns. They may respond to your emotional expressions with blank stares, changes of subject, or visible annoyance, making it clear that your inner world has become irrelevant to them. During this phase, the avoidant often begins to treat you more like a roommate or acquaintance than a romantic partner. Conversations become purely practical. Physical affection becomes rare or mechanical, and any attempt to create romantic or intimate moments is met with resistance or indifference. This stage frequently includes the avoidant beginning to act single in social situations, either by failing to mention their relationship or by behaving in ways that suggest they're available for romantic attention from others. They may flirt openly, make plans without consulting you, or generally act as if your feelings about their behavior are irrelevant. The practical aspects of your relationship typically deteriorate significantly during this stage. The avoidant may stop contributing to shared responsibilities, stop making future plans that include you, and generally begin to disentangle their life from yours without discussion or explanation. Sexual intimacy often becomes non-existent or extremely rare during this phase, with the avoidant showing no interest in physical connection and often rejecting your advances. When intimacy does occur, it typically feels disconnected and perfunctory rather than passionate or loving. Communication during this stage becomes minimal and functional, with the avoidant showing no interest in your thoughts, feelings, or experiences. They may respond to direct questions with monosyllables and avoid any conversations that require emotional engagement or relationship discussion. This stage often triggers desperate attempts from partners to reconnect, understand what's wrong, or fix whatever problems might be causing the distance. These efforts are typically met with increased irritation, suggesting that your attempts to restore connection are actually pushing them further away. The psychological impact of this stage includes feeling like you're living with a stranger, questioning whether the person you fell in love with ever really existed, and experiencing the grief of losing someone who's still physically present. The duration of this stage varies, depending on the avoidance circumstances and their tolerance for the guilt or discomfort that their emotional abandonment creates. Some avoidants remain in this stage for months, essentially forcing their partners to end the relationship rather than taking responsibility for the decision themselves. The discard typically occurs in one of three ways. The avoidant simply disappears without explanation, ghosting. They create a dramatic conflict that justifies their departure. They deliver a cold, matter-of-fact breakup speech that treats the relationship ending as an inevitable and logical conclusion rather than an emotional loss. When avoidants choose to explain their decision, their reasoning typically focuses on fundamental incompatibility rather than acknowledging their own emotional limitations. They may cite your emotional needs as evidence that you want different things. your relationship expectations as proof that you're not right for each other, or general statements about needing to be single. This stage frequently includes the avoidant expressing relief about ending the relationship and emphasizing their excitement about being single again. They may mention specific aspects of independence they're looking forward to reclaiming, making it clear that the relationship felt more like a burden than a source of joy or fulfillment. The avoidance behavior immediately following the discard typically involves complete no contact and immediate investment in single life activities. They may become more social, more active on dating apps, or more focused on individual pursuits, demonstrating that they don't experience the grief or adjustment period that typically follows relationship endings. If you attempt to discuss the decision, seek closure, or understand what went wrong, the avoidant typically responds with frustration, suggesting that you should accept their decision and move on. They often refuse to engage in post-relationship processing or explanation, treating any attempts at understanding as evidence that you're having difficulty accepting reality. The practical aspects of the discard are often handled with business-like efficiency, with the avoidant wanting to resolve logistical issues, shared belongings, living arrangements, mutual friends as quickly as possible to minimize ongoing contact. They typically approach these practical matters with the same emotional detachment they used for the breakup itself. This stage often includes the avoidant expressing surprise or irritation if you're emotionally devastated by the ending, suggesting that the writing was on the wall and that you should have seen this coming. They may genuinely not understand why you're shocked by a decision that feels inevitable and logical to them. The avoidance post-discard behavior typically involves immediate emotional detachment and forward movement, with no apparent grief, regret, or second-guessing about their decision. They may seem genuinely confused by suggestions that they might miss aspects of the relationship or that ending it represents a significant loss. The psychological impact of this stage on their partners includes shock, confusion, and intense grief that feels disproportionate to the avoidance matter-of-fact approach to the ending. Stage 7. The phantom return. The cycle begins again. The seventh and final stage involves the avoidance eventual return, typically occurring 6 to 18 months after the discard. Once they've exhausted the novelty of independence and begun to miss the specific benefits that their previous relationship provided, this return often catches their ex-partners off guard because it contrasts so sharply with the finality and indifference they demonstrated during the discard. The return typically begins with casual contact that seems innocent but is actually testing whether you're still emotionally available and potentially interested in reconnection. They may reach out with a neutral message about practical matters, share something that reminds them of you, or simply check how you're doing with seemingly friendly rather than romantic intentions. If you respond positively to their initial contact, they often gradually increase their attention and charm, essentially restarting the cycle from stage 1, but with the added intensity of rekindled connection. They may acknowledge missing you, express appreciation for what you shared, or suggest that time apart helped them realize what they lost. The psychology behind the return involves their delayed attachment response finally surfacing after months of suppressed connection needs. During their absence, they typically discovered that replacing the specific benefits you provided, emotional support, practical assistance, reliable companionship, is more difficult than they anticipated. Their return often includes promises of change, declarations of newfound appreciation, and assurances that they now understand what went wrong the first time. However, these promises are typically based on their current emotional state rather than actual development of greater emotional capacity or relationship skills. The honeymoon period that follows successful phantom returns often feels more intense than the original relationship's beginning because both parties are relieved to reconnect and motivated to make things work. However, this intensity typically masks the reality that the fundamental dynamics that caused the original problems remain unchanged. The timeline for cycling through all 7 stages again is typically shorter than the original cycle, as both parties fall back into familiar patterns more quickly. The avoidance tolerance for intimacy hasn't actually increased, and your attachment to them may be even stronger due to the trauma bonding created by the previous cycle. Multiple phantom returns and cycle repetitions often occur until either the avoidant finds a replacement relationship that better suits their attachment style, or their ex-partner develops enough emotional strength to refuse continued participation in the cycle. The phantom return represents the most psychologically damaging aspect of avoidant relationships because it creates hope that change is possible while actually reinforcing the same dysfunctional patterns. Each cycle typically leaves their partners more trauma bonded and less capable of recognizing healthy relationship alternatives. The intermittent reinforcement created by this cycle is the same psychological mechanism used by casinos and drug dealers to create dependency. Your brain becomes addicted to the unpredictable rewards while developing tolerance for increasingly poor treatment, making it difficult to recognize that the relationship is fundamentally unhealthy. The cycle also prevents you from developing emotional equilibrium or clear perspective about the relationship's problems because you're constantly reacting to the avoidance changing behavior rather than evaluating whether the overall dynamic serves your well-being. Each stage creates different emotions that prevent you from maintaining consistent standards or boundaries. Breaking free from this cycle requires recognizing it as a predictable pattern rather than a series of relationship challenges that can be overcome through love, patience, or accommodation. The cycle will repeat indefinitely unless you choose to exit it completely, as avoidants rarely develop the emotional capacity necessary to create healthier relationship dynamics without significant therapeutic intervention and personal commitment to change.